So, upon first confronting the massive barrier, Captain Ross wrote of the wall, quote, extending from its eastern extreme point as far as the eye could discern to the eastward, it presented an extraordinary appearance, gradually increasing in height as we got nearer to it, and proving at length to be a perpendicular cliff of ice between 150 and 200 feet above the level of the sea, perfectly flat and level at the top, and without any fissures or promontories on its even seaward face. We might with equal chance of success try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as to penetrate such a mass. So the Antarctic expeditions began in 1773 with English Captain James Cook, who became the first modern explorer to have reached the Antarctic Circle and the ice barrier. During his 3 voyages over more than 3 years, he sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall. Then 70 years later, Captain James Clark Ross and his crew spent 4 years, 5 months, and sailed 2 heavily armored warships thousands of miles, losing many men from hurricanes and icebergs, looking for an entry point beyond the southern glacial wall, yet not finding one. The British ship Challenger at Ross's command completed the circuit of the southern region, traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times around the globe. So between these 2 ships, sailing over 125,000 miles, they would have gone around the Earth over 5 times, yet they never found the Antarctic inland passage they were looking for. Also, during Captain Ross's voyages, he often wrote in his journal how perplexed he was that they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside of their reckoning every day, some days as much as 29 miles. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition in the Antarctic in 1838 to 42, almost 4 years, and he spent exploring and surveying the Southern Ocean. In his journal, Lieutenant Wilkes also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours. Also in Captain Ross's book, South Sea Voyages, he describes his experience in 1839 as his conclusion that the Earth must be motionless. He says, quote, the sky being very clear, it enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, and a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also often been observed by former voyagers. Now, these men are dependent on the weather for their ships to move, so you know they're taking very, very accurate observational readings of the weather and the winds and whatnot. So he goes on to say, Count Strzelecki further informed me of the following seemingly anomalous circumstance, that at the height of 6,000 feet he found the current of air blowing at right angles to both the lower strata, also of a different hygrometric and thermometric condition, but warmer than the interstratum. Such a state of the atmosphere is compatible only with the fact which other evidence has demonstrated that the Earth is at rest. Side note, as Captain Cook unwittingly sowed the seeds of future exploration. However, with his detailed report of ample seal and whale populations in the Southern Ocean, hunters flocked to the area and drove seal populations to near extinction.
In the 1700s, this guy gets there. You get into the 1800s, they get closer and closer. And then when you get to the 1900s, that's where things get really interesting. Shackleton, this guy Shackleton goes down there on the, and I think I put this in my original blog. He goes down there on the name of the ship is the Nimrod. He goes down there on the Nimrod, and it's called the Nimrod Expedition. I'm like, seriously? Okay, Nimrod's goal was to reach into heaven, right? Yeah, the Nimrod Expedition. So you can click on the link I got there and read all about the Nimrod Expedition, British Antarctic Expedition, otherwise known as the Nimrod Expedition. And it was on the name of the ship was the Nimrod right here. Okay, Nimrod was trying to reach into heaven by going up. Could it be that these guys are trying to go out, try to find the ground floor? I don't know, but I mean, why do you? And this is what really got me is they did so in 1908. 1908. I'm like, really? 1908? Seriously? 1908 is when Nimrod was born, according to my other. Let me see. one I put in here. This is one of my other blogs. Yeah. Okay. The 350 post-flood years of Noah's life. This is a chart I did last year, and the follow-up chart, the Nimrod-Abraham timeline. Nimrod was born in 1908 AM, or years since creation. And then 1908, see, 1907 to 1909, well, that's 1908. Nimrod went to Antarctica. I'm like, I mean, you can't write this stuff. I mean,
so I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year, to the bottom of the world, because the government has really become interested.
Well, Admiral Byrd, I can understand, I think everybody can, the interest in the North Pole because it's so near our greatest challenger, Soviet Russia, but why this interest in the bottom of the world? Nobody living down there, is there?
No, it's pretty cold. There's only one permanent resident, that's the emperor penguin. The little ones live further north. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime, because it happens to be an untouched reservoir of natural resources. And you know, as the world shrinks with an ever-increasing acceleration, far-flung places once useless, like we thought the North Pole was, and no man's land, become very useful. The bottom of the world will be important, not only to us, but to our allies.
I was going to ask you, does it have military importance?
It has some, and as the world shrinks, it will continue to shrink with an ever-increasing acceleration, thus bringing these places closer. And in the future, I can see a time when it will be very, very important strategically.
So let's take a quick little sidebar on Admiral Byrd. His first expedition began in 1928, involving 2 ships and 3 airplanes. It was declared a photographic expedition and geological surveys. After the first winter, the expeditions resumed, and on November 28, 1929, Byrd made his famous flight to the South Pole and back. As a result of his fame, he was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral by a special act of Congress on winter solstice, December 21st, 1929. He was only 41 years old and the youngest admiral in the history of the United States Navy. So on his second expedition in 1934, he spent 5 winter months alone operating a meteorological station at an advanced base camp, from which he narrowly escaped with his life after suffering carbon monoxide poisoning from a poorly ventilated stove, as chronicled here in the New York Times. Now, I just want to ask the question, why would a newly minted admiral, one of the most famous men in the world, spend months in a shack in temperatures to minus 80 degrees, alone by himself, where just years before he almost died, to man a meteorological station? Does this job require one of the most famous men on Earth at the time? This doesn't make any sense to me at all. So the United States Antarctic Service Expedition was from 1939 to 1941. It was Admiral Byrd's 3rd Antarctic expedition, jointly sponsored by the Navy, State Department, Department of Interior, and the Treasury. Everybody was involved. Also, it was sponsored by donations and gifts from private citizens, corporations, institutions. One of those, of course, is the Rockefellers. We can read on the trip here that a total of 125 men departed from the United States in 2 ships. And the objectives of the expedition were outlined in an order from Roosevelt dated in 1939. The president wanted 2 bases to be established. And then we can read back that in 1939, the New York Times quoted, President Roosevelt moved to prevent possible extension of Germany's claims to Antarctic areas. He sent Byrd to leave in October for the sphere of influence of the Monroe Doctrine. It is apparent that this government was prepared to take the position, if necessary, that any attempts by foreign powers to establish bases west of the 180th meridian in the Antarctic would be considered an unfriendly act. So they're making the case that the Germans going down in 39 also, they were racing down there at the same exact time, but they never did see each other and never did come close. They seem to be very real and present danger, but we find that through Germany's presence, the land of everlasting mystery was publicized reasons for Byrd's hurry-up expedition, and at no time did he take command or any attempt to observe what the German expedition was up to. So that sounds like it was just a ruse. Also, this little article in the back pages of the New York Times, November 30th, 1939, secret orders taken on Byrd's polar trip. Rear Admiral Byrd joined the Vanguard expedition at the Panama Canal with confidential orders from the White House. Officials say the orders were a State Department secret. Even the existence of the orders, authorities said, had been kept secret. Admiral Byrd received them, informants say, on a hurried trip to Washington last week before departing to Panama. It is possible that these, quote, secret orders contain the real reason for Admiral Byrd's expedition. Was the fact that the Germans were also conducting a secret expedition in Antarctica make the Admiral's real reason for putting together the American expedition a matter of utmost importance? Could both expeditions have been carrying secret orders to explore unknown lands beyond the pole where the Americans and Germans involved in 1939 in a race to first gain entrance and explore the legendary lands inside our Earth? All right, so let's get a little more into the expedition from the Nazis in 1939 to 41. Did the Nazis have a secret Antarctic focus or fortress? And we can read down that there was a peer-reviewed study by Colin Summerhays, a geologist and oceanographer with the Scott Polar Research Institute. So immediately, since the Antarctic Treaty system is in place, no one's been allowed to go on Antarctic without military government approval out of the United States. We immediately must suspect this as the source of quality research and information. And Peter Beijing, a journalist. This was a 21-page myth-busting juggernaut printed in the scholarly journal Polar Record. The German Antarctic Expedition and Base. In 1938, they sent a large team of explorers to the Queen Maud region of Antarctica. They discovered a vast network of warm water rivers and caves. One of these caves extended down as far as 20 to 30 miles and contained a large geothermal lake. The cave was explored and construction teams were sent in to build city-sized bases dubbed Base 211 or New Berlin that hosted the SS, the Thule Society, serpent cults, various Nazi occultists, the Illuminati, and other shadowy groups. Remember, this is a peer-reviewed study, folks. At some point, the Germans either discovered abandoned alien technology or made contact with extraterrestrial explorers, variously described as greys or reptilians. They learned or were taught how to replicate the alien technology and used it to begin developing a number of super weapons, including an advanced aircraft called an anti-gravity disc or flying saucer. While many of these weapons were not ready for use in war, the base had the ability to manufacture these weapons. Now, the survey says that in 1938 to 1939, the Schwabenland and its goal was to scout new territory for expanding German whaling industry. Now, this makes total sense since they were desperate for oil, and the whaling business down there was picking up greatly. But even if they had wanted to, it's not likely the Schwabenland crew could have built even a small base, let alone the one the size of a small city. According to the ship's logs, they were only there for a month.
Okay, let's pick up the scenario. We were originally talking about the spiriting out of the two spacecraft out of Berlin before the Allies arrived. We said that they were put aboard two submarines. They spent 6 months at sea, and they finally landed in Argentina. Now, from that point, they were taken into Antarctica, into a section of Antarctica called Queen Maud's Land. And there they disappeared, and they were not heard of for some time. Now, intelligence sources, and of course I was in the intelligence business at that time with the agency, reports indicated that they were in there and they were operative once again. Now, there was a major concern by world powers to go in and capture the technology and the two spacecraft which they knew were in Antarctica. And the intelligence reports indicated that one known as Admiral Byrd was to be recommissioned, and he was to be sent in there to retrieve the two saucers and also the technology and personnel associated with it. Later reports indicated that Admiral Byrd was given 8 months and unlimited funding to go in and pull this thing successfully off. But we also know that within 8 weeks he was totally defeated. Now, the supposition at that point was that there was an advanced civilization and technology, most probably alien. There were with the Third Reich and the SS who was in Antarctica, and that those great and developed technologies were used to defeat Admiral Byrd.
Then curiously, around the same time, actually in the 45, the British had Operation Tabarin. They were claiming South Shetland, South Orkney. They put bases down in the Falkland Islands, and they decided they needed a permanent area to monitor Nazi activity in Antarctica, Argentina, and Chile. A secret military operation, Operation Tabarin, was launched by the Royal Navy and established bases throughout the islands. Then it goes on to say, debunking it, for one thing, the summer of 45, Hitler was dead and Germans had surrendered to the Allies. For another, the SSS was disbanded in October and wasn't reestablished until a few years later. Deterrence and spying were not stated goals. The base crews consisted mainly of wireless radio operators and government scientists, consisted only of 13 people. So we totally debunked that story. The next one we come into is Operation High Jump, which began in 46 and 47. When the British failed to expel the Germans from Antarctica, the U.S. launched Operation High Jump in 1946 to destroy the German base. The ground and air forces were fought back by Germany's flying saucers, and the base was finally obliterated by 3 nuclear bomb strikes. The flying saucers that have been sighted in the U.S. since then are Nazi spy craft. I mean, this is pretty ridiculous coming from a peer-reviewed scholarly study. And as we'll get into, if a German base in Antarctica was the real target of Operation High Jump, its planners were lacking some very basic map reading skills. By all accounts, the supposed Navy cave was under Queen Maud Land somewhere, but High Jump was based on the Ross Ice Shelf on the opposite side of the continent. So let's get more into Operation High Jump. Then 70 years later, Captain James Clark Ross and his crew spent 4 years, 5 months, and sailed 2 heavily armored warships thousands of miles, losing many men from hurricanes and icebergs, looking for an entry point beyond the southern glacial wall, yet not finding one. The British ship Challenger at Ross's command completed the circuit of the southern region, traversed nearly 69,000 miles, a stretch long enough to have taken her 6 times around the globe. So between these 2 ships, sailing over 125,000 miles, they would have gone around the Earth over 5 times, yet they never found the Antarctic shores. Also in Captain Ross's book, South Sea Voyages, he describes his experience in 1839 as his conclusion that the Earth must be motionless. He says, quote, "The sky being very clear, it enabled us to observe the higher stratum of clouds to be moving in an exactly opposite direction to that of the wind, and a circumstance which is frequently recorded in our meteorological journal, both in the northeast and southeast trades, and has also often been observed by former voyagers." Now, these men are dependent on the weather for their ships to move, so you know they're taking very, very accurate observations. So, upon first confronting the massive barrier, Captain Ross wrote of the wall, quote, "Extending from its eastern extreme point as far as the eye could discern to the eastward, it presented an extraordinary appearance, gradually increasing in height as we got nearer to it, and proving at length to be a perpendicular cliff of ice between one inland passage they were looking for." Also, during Captain Ross's voyages, he often wrote in his journal how perplexed he was that they routinely found themselves out of accordance with their charts, stating that they found themselves an average of 12 to 16 miles outside of their reckoning every day, some days as much as 29 miles. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes commanded a United States Navy exploration expedition in the Antarctic in 1838 to 42, almost 4 years, and he spent exploring and surveying the Southern Ocean. In his journal, Lieutenant Wilkes also mentioned being consistently east of his reckoning, sometimes over 20 miles in less than 18 hours, 150 and 200 feet above the level of the sea, perfectly flat and level at the top, and without any fissures or promontories on its even seaward face. We might with equal chance of success try to sail through the cliffs of Dover as to penetrate such a mass. So the Antarctic expeditions began in 1773 with English Captain James Cook, who became the first modern explorer to have reached the Antarctic Circle and the ice barrier. During his 3 voyages over more than 3 years, he sailed a total of 60,000 miles along the Antarctic coastline, never once finding an inlet or path through or beyond the massive glacial wall.